under the flickering neon lights of a small police precinct in the American South, where patrol cars lined up beside an old oak standing still in the silence, a name once synonymous with loyalty and trust in the honor of the force, suddenly became the epicenter of an unprecedented scandal. No blood was shed, no gunfire echoed. But something heavier than murder lingered in the air, honor distorted, a system laid bare, and one human being cast out not for committing a crime, but for daring to touch an unspoken taboo sex among the badge-bearers. Her name was Megan Hall, and as the fragments of truth began to surface, no one was asking what she had done wrong because a louder question echoed from the shadows: who made the rules, and why was she the only one forced to pay the price? There are towns so small that nothing unthinkable seems possible. La Vergne, Tennessee, just a dot on the map where life moved quietly, morning roll calls, bursts of laughter in the break room. There, Megan Hall, 26 years old, newly married for less than 6 months, wore a police uniform still loose at the shoulders, her new boots clumsy with each step. They used to call her Rookie Baby, naive, harmless, endearing. But the teasing stopped when Megan's name showed up in internal emails. No one laughed when a veteran officer was asked to leave the room for a private meeting. And certainly no one laughed when private images began to leak: midnight texts, smiles caught on camera. Random calls during night shifts, each moment twisted into evidence for an invisible but weightier indictment than any criminal charge. What had she done? Officially, there was no criminal offense. According to initial testimonies, there was no coercion. But in whispered hallway glances and quietly forwarded messages, everyone had heard, seen, or known that she had emerged from certain rooms after hours. It all began with a few beers after shifts, not just co-workers blowing off steam. Until the shoulder taps lingered too long, the glances lost their innocence and the invitations turned vague. "Come over for a bit, my wife's out of town." Megan, learning to be a wife, a cop, a listener on the night patrol, slowly became entangled in a web of intimate interactions no one dared define. She didn't resist. She didn't report. She filed no complaint. But she also didn't know how to say no when the hand tugging her belonged to a direct superior, when the invitation came from someone who could assign shifts, evaluate performance, and write reports to higher-ups. And in that world where a text at 11 p.m. could be interpreted 100 ways, who truly has the power to define consent? People said she knew exactly what she was doing, but no one asked. Who taught her how to refuse when the one making the request held command over her? The name Megan Hall was no longer a person in the public eye. It was a headline in podcasts, a joke in tabloid captions, a face in countless internet memes. From the kind eyes in her recruitment photo to the cold cutouts plastered by the media, she was no longer an employee, she had become a symbol. Not of feminism, not of resistance, but of depravity, hung in the public square, to be judged, mocked, condemned with brutal, unrelenting certainty. And what about the men involved? None were fired on the spot. Some were placed on temporary leave. A few were reassigned. One casually said, "We were tempted too." But no one labeled them as disgraceful. No hashtags demanded their punishment. No public ridicule chased them. Because somewhere within the system, a young woman who failed to keep herself is always more blameworthy than the men who failed to keep their role. Megan returned to her small apartment, once adorned with wedding photos, now stripped bare. Her phone never stopped vibrating. Not from concern, but from anonymous judgments. Each call a silent trial, each message a verdict of shame. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, clutching the termination letter. No defense, no explanation. Just a few cold final lines, due to inappropriate conduct, detrimental to the department's honor. But no one asked had that honor ever protected her. After that party, Megan lost track of how many times she returned to that house or ones just like it. Sometimes it was a cabin by the lake. Other times, a bachelor officer's rented apartment where the flickering hallway lights were replaced by scented candles and a low jazz hum. The settings shifted, but the script stayed the same: a private invitation, a strong drink, and eyes that studied her not with desire, but with the expectation of obedience. Like someone inspecting the behavior of a trained recruit. Eventually, no one asked her to come anymore. Her presence became a given. She was folded into the culture, an unspoken ritual no one admitted aloud. And in that quiet normalization, she lost the last thread of being seen as a victim. Instead, she became the easiest target of blame. One night after a late shift nearing midnight, Megan stopped by a roadside diner. She ordered a ham sandwich and took the corner booth alone. On the TV mounted above a local news segment aired a report on inappropriate conduct in law enforcement. A brief cut flashed her face cropped from her personnel file with a headline crawling beneath, "Female officer involved in sexual misconduct scandal." She froze. The waiter set down her glass of water without meeting her eyes. No one insulted her. No one whispered. But the silence thick dodging, as if everyone had glimpsed something foul, pierced deeper than any insult. In that moment, Megan felt invisible yet exposed. Not a person, but a warning label. She didn't tell anyone, not even her husband. He moved out shortly after citing a need for space. She didn't blame him. Not really. On quiet nights, Megan lay on the couch, the TV flickering soundlessly. The dim flashes painted her wide-open eyes with ghostly light, like she was afraid to blink, afraid the dreams would replay. The shoulder touch. The whisper. Everyone tries eventually. The broken chair behind the dumpster abandoned like the collective cowardice it symbolized. She once thought, if the truth ever came out, anyone would step forward. Say they saw, that they knew, that they had feared too. But no one did. They stayed silent. They looked away. And they left the media to play judge and jury. She was labeled a badge-wearing whore, a mental case, a disgrace to the badge. Her photo circulated like a meme. Her reputation sliced into punchlines pinned online for strangers to dissect. One night she wrote in her notebook, "I don't know if I'm the villain or the casualty, but I know I'm not alone." Silence may be the only option when justice has already chosen a side. Then she made a choice. She met with a lawyer. The man across the desk didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, no judgment in his gaze. And in that brief moment, Megan felt something she hadn't in months. She felt human again. Not a headline, not a punchline. Just a woman trying to breathe, drowning in the quiet, in a world that had already convicted her before she ever spoke a word. 1 year after the name Megan Hall was removed from the personnel roster, the city underwent a major restructuring of its law enforcement force. Some senior officers retired early, while others were transferred to different districts under the pretext of optimizing workforce allocation. But in those lengthy reports, there wasn't a single line mentioning the incident that once threw the entire department into turmoil. They were filed away, meaning locked and left unresolved. During a personnel file update, the code Officer 47B was tagged with an additional label. No response ceased tracking, a decision never publicly announced, but everyone understood it as the system's final signal: this matter is closed. Megan lived in a small apartment in another town, working part-time at a gas station. She carried no images from her past, only an old tape recorder she occasionally played, like someone listening to a dream that once was real. Not to remember, but to ask herself, who was I back then? The gas station manager sometimes saw her sitting silently for hours, staring through the window toward the highway. When asked, she only said, "I used to patrol. Now, I stand guard in a different way." One October afternoon, her mailbox received an envelope with no sender's name. Inside was a black and white photo printed from a blurry security camera. In the picture, she years ago stood among a group of officers smiling brightly after a training session. On the back of the photo was a handwritten line, "We remember you, but weren't brave enough to say it when it mattered." Megan didn't cry. But that night she reopened her old notebook. The last blank page was filled with a single sentence, not defiant, not accusatory, just bare like life itself. Sometimes surviving isn't winning, it's refusing to be defined by others. At her former station, they began implementing a training module on ethics after hours. One Monday morning, a newly assigned officer asked in class, "Has anyone ever violated the code?" The instructor smiled, avoiding the trainee's gaze, and replied, "There was, but that file was closed. We only learn from its shadow." Megan's story was never turned into a report. It had no clear ending, no verdict, no justice, no apology. But in places that once remained silent, people began to take notes. Quietly, secretly, but notes nonetheless. A rookie officer, after training hours, wrote in his personal journal, "I don't know who Megan Hall is, but I know that to be a cop, you first have to have the courage not to look away when you see wrong." A name erased from the system, a face blurred in the files, sometimes, is the price of daring to exist. And somewhere in new classrooms, new hallways, new patrol shifts, her story is passed down through fragments of memories not yet lost. No one dares to speak it out loud, but no one dares to ignore the silence anymore. 2 months after Megan's brief appearance at the training class, unusual signals began leaking within the police force. Not a new investigation, not a media comeback, but an atmosphere. The atmosphere of a system once run on certainty, now starting to crack under furtive glances, anonymous sticky notes taped under desks, and quiet questions scribbled at the end of every shift feedback form. Why don't we have an official psychological support unit? How long has it been since anyone took leave for mental health reasons? We record violations. But has anyone ever recorded emotions? Those questions bore no sender's name. Yet everyone understood the shadow of someone lingered behind each word. On the 6th floor, where the Behavioral Oversight Office was located, a proposal with a strange code was delivered. It didn't come through official channels, but via a USB stick left in the internal mailbox. No signature. But the title alone made the recipient pause. The Hall Case Starting Point for a Review of the Culture of Silence. Inside were 27 pages not to defend nor to reopen the scandal, but an analysis of the structure of indifference. Every small symptom dissected like a surgical endoscopy. Unanswered messages after hours. Overlapping shift schedules like invisible punishments. Emergency meetings with no minutes, but everyone knew who the target was. The last page showed a spiral chart placing a person in need of help at the center with surrounding layers of denial from individual to teammates to the system. Megan Hall's name never appeared, but the reader understood no one would write this without having faced the cold shoulder. At a small suburban police station, a group of young officers organized an unofficial talk. They didn't discuss weapons attack techniques or case files. The topic posted on handmade paper read, "Emotions and the things we are not trained for." One recounted seeing Megan standing silently in the break room after a night shift. Eyes not red, saying nothing, just sitting there. When he asked, "Are you okay, sis?" Megan just nodded, as if everything was fine. But now looking back, that nod was a cry for help that no one had learned to hear. Another told of an arrest operation when Megan was the only one who asked a child witness, "Are you hungry?" while the group was arguing about which template to use for the testimony. The last story came from a young female officer who once happened to see Megan standing in front of the mirror in the restroom, removing her name tag, staring at herself for a long time, as if trying to find where the real self ended and the role she had to play began. That night, one of the officers from the talk quietly sent an email to the HR feedback inbox. No subject, no lengthy content. Just one line. "Are we punishing the first person who spoke up instead of asking why they had to speak up through wrongdoing?" In the city where Megan lived, she no longer wore a uniform. She worked as an administrator at a trauma support center. No one there asked about her past. But once a boy, the son of a patient, looked at her and said, "Were you a cop? You don't look like the ones I see on TV." Megan smiled softly. "Yeah, I used to think I was part of the system. Now, I help those the system forgot." No one recorded that answer, but it was retold many times in informal meetings, under tables, on rooftops, in hallway corners where rules can't control memory. At the old police headquarters, the electronic board in the corridor used to run slogans like "Pride, Honor, Responsibility." One day, someone replaced a line with "Not everyone who breaks the law is bad, and not everyone who enforces the law is innocent." The line was erased after 2 hours. But someone took a photo and shared it in an internal group. And so it lived, not on the notice board, but in the minds of those who started to ask questions. No court needed for the verdict. Megan Hall didn't come back, but she never really left. Because somewhere, every time a new officer stands before the mirror, pins their name tag on their uniform and wonders, "Could I be different? Could I choose not to turn away from a silent colleague?" That's when Megan Hall's name reappears, no call needed, no badge, no headlines. Just a memory real enough that people don't forget they once failed a person. Not because she crossed the line, but because everyone walked away before she even took a single step wrong. The first draft was created at 3:42 a.m., written by Daniel Cruz, an internal communications assistant, who usually pens monthly inspirational pieces about unit culture stories of overcoming adversity, dedicated officers' ceremonies without audiences. Daniel had once recounted farewells, where no one dared to look the departing colleague in the eye, and sacrifices cut from evening news because they affected the force's image. But this was the first time he wrote without an order. And the first time. The system rejected him right from the title. Original title, "The Nameless One Everyone Knows." System error, exceeded level 2 sensitivity threshold. Retry, a lesson in isolation within an apparently united environment. Error, negative language undermining collective spirit. Try again, what silence leaves behind, closed colleague doors. Error content causing internal psychological disruption. Finally, Daniel typed a sarcastic title. This article contains no names, no faults, only truth. The file saved. But when reopened, only a question mark remained on the page. No words, no paragraphs. Just a single question asked back. "What are you trying to write?" Daniel sat silently. His wife still slept. The baby in the next room was still dreaming. But inside his head echoed old whispers behind Megan Hall's back. "Heard she's been depressed since the divorce. She's not bad, but everyone has limits. Want to help, but standing with her means betraying the system." He wasn't close to Megan, but remembered once she walked into his office during lunch break. No request to publish, no demand for vindication. just asked one question. Have you ever felt sad writing about people no one wants to remember? That day, he smiled it off. Today, that question is stamped like ink across his forehead. The more he tries to wipe it away, the deeper it sinks in. So Daniel rewrote it. Not on a computer. By hand. One A4 page taped under his desk late at night. Megan Hall didn't destroy this unit's reputation. We did by leaving her alone amid expectations, suppression, and organized silence. The next morning, Daniel was suspended. Reason: violation of protocol for sharing unapproved information. No one mentioned him in meetings after that. No one asked, as if he never worked there. His name was wiped from the directory system. But in an anonymous internal inbox, someone found a file named Untitled Hope Draft V3. Opening it, no title, no paragraphs, only one line. There are stories that don't need to be written, only never forgotten. Some rookie read that file, forwarded it to another. No comment, no annotation, just spread. And strangely, each person who opened the file saw a different line, as if the story changed according to the eyes reading it. Some saw the truth doesn't need a megaphone, only someone who won't turn away. Some saw, sometimes, silence is an action and it has consequences. Some saw only if one person must scream to be heard. How many others have died in silence? The first person to leave the unit after Megan was not one of the 7 officers under investigation. It was the wife of one of them. Her name was Amanda, 32 years old, the department's internal accountant. Every morning she brewed coffee for her husband before he put on his uniform and left the house. Before the incident, Amanda believed in the concept of the dedicated public servant, someone committed for life to the title and the team. But after the incident, everything quietly shattered. She could no longer look at her husband without seeing Megan's face reflected in his eyes. Her husband was never found guilty. He was only suspended, then reinstated. But it was that certified innocence that terrified Amanda the most. Because if he had done nothing wrong, then why did no one dare to face the question what really happened? Amanda did not file for divorce. She just left the house where she had chosen every tile in the kitchen, leaving behind a short note. I don't want to live with someone who has learned to survive in silence. The second was an intern named Casey, who had shared shifts with Megan for a few weeks in the winter. When the incident broke out, Casey was called into HR to confirm conversations that might have happened between her and Megan. Did she ever try to get you to do anything? Did she ever get too close to anyone? Did she ever speak badly about the unit? Casey answered no to all, then walked out feeling like she had betrayed someone, simply because she didn't dare say she was silent too long and no one noticed. 3 months later, Casey did not apply to continue working after her internship. In an email to herself, she wrote, "They don't teach you how to report when you see someone pushed into the shadows. They only teach you how to pass by quickly." Another person named Ben was a night shift officer working a different shift from Megan. He never met her in person. But once, while checking the internal image archive, he discovered a camera had been installed in break room number 3, the room Megan often entered at noon to nap for a few minutes. That camera had been removed. No one knew who installed it. No reports recorded it. Ben told no one. He simply printed a photo from the video Megan sitting alone looking out the window. Then folded the photo, tucked it into his wallet behind his driver's license. A year later, at an internal ethics seminar, when asked, "What changed your view of the workplace?" Ben only replied, "Someone I never spoke to." The scandal no longer made headlines. It was no longer on news websites. It was no longer mentioned in internal newsletters. But it remained in small, restrained gestures, in questions bitten back before spoken, and in long silences between colleagues passing in corridors. Some things don't need to happen to leave a mark. They only need to pass by, be buried collectively, denied enough for each person to quietly ask themselves, am I becoming part of the silence that killed a human being and Megan erased from every duty roster, absent from any internal data? History became the quietest, yet the widest spreading story. Not by accusation, not by announcement, but by unspoken traces held in the hearts of those who seemed unrelated at all. On Tuesday morning, the final year class at the State Police Academy proceeded as usual. On the board was the course title, Public Service Ethics and Professional Boundaries. The lecturer was Mr. Whitman, a veteran former officer who had left the force after 27 years of service, a man so cold that cadets nicknamed him Mr. Ice. He rarely spoke in circles, but that day he started the lesson not with a textbook, but with an audio clip. No visuals, just a female voice, steady, unshaken, yet weary enough that you could feel it in every breath. She said, when you realize you have been placed in a room without cameras, not because you don't matter, but because no one cares if you live or die. A silence like a blade cut through the lecture hall. After a few seconds, Mr. Whitman spoke slowly, the voice of a former officer erased from internal records. He didn't say her name, but everyone knew. A name that had once slipped through every headline, then vanished from all data. We will not discuss her as a case, but as a lesson unfinished. He began writing 2 words on the board: boundaries. Boundaries are not just the red lines drawn by the organization. They are also the lines a person must ask themselves. What will I hold on to if I have to lose my career, my reputation, and even my faith? That day, no one spoke up, but everyone took notes. Some hands shook. Some wrote without knowing what they were writing. Some looked up, seeing Mr. Whitman for the first time, not reading from a textbook, but speaking as if tearing out a deeply buried memory. After class, one cadet named Marcus returned to the lecture room. He asked, "Sir, why did you dare play that recording?" Whitman looked at Marcus, then out the window, where sunlight poured through a thin curtain, casting the window frame's shadow on the wooden desk, like prison bars. "Because I no longer wear the uniform, and because I was the first person to tell her, if you follow all the rules, you'll never get into trouble." He paused for a long moment, then said, "I was wrong." That audio later circulated quietly among cadets. It never spread loudly. But each year, a few would share it with classmates. No one made it public. No one named the speaker. But everyone knew who it came from. It became known as recording number 7. Not because it was the 7th recording, but because the number evoked the number of people named in the case, and the one pushed out was none of them. Megan didn't know the audio still existed, and Whitman never taught again after that year. He retired, moving to the suburbs where no one knew he had once been the ethics instructor, shaping a generation of young officers. But when a few years later a rookie was asked in the final exam, in a conflict between law and morality, what would you do? The girl did not answer directly. She only wrote 4 words in the answer box. Listen to the recording. Sunday, 6:17 a.m., inside Archive Room 4 basement of Jackson County Police Department. Jared, an internal data handler, sat curled up under the yellow glow of an old CRT monitor. The building's corridor lights shut off after 1 a.m., and from where he sat, the hum of the servers sounded like the weary heartbeat of an aging system. He had no important task. Just sorting old folders, deleting encrypted files from the previous term, cleaning digital junk. But that night, among hundreds of cold-coded files, he stumbled upon a strangely named folder, XCRR-MGHN unmatched key. When he opened it, there were no reports, no legal documents. Only a single-line recipient does not exist, and an email never sent. Sender admin, internal@jackson.gov. Recipient Megan, HalaLocalUnit.gov created 302, 03:42 a.m. Subject regarding what was never spoken. Jared didn't know who Megan was. He had been on the job for just 2 years, born after the scandals that forced the entire department to shut down the internal network for 3 weeks. Yet something compelled him to open the email's content. The message was less than 200 words, but every word seemed written in a never-ending sigh. Megan, we have no way to fix the past. But if you can still read this, whether a system copy or just a scar in the data network, this is the only thing I can leave behind. I heard the recording. Not from the press, but from a cadet who passed it hand to hand, like a whisper about what happened. I am neither a good person nor a villain. I am just a part of a machine that has run too long to realize what it is crushing. We chose silence not because we didn't know, but because we knew too well that speaking out would make everything collapse. I do not expect your forgiveness. I only want you to know at least someone remembers, even though your name has been erased from the system. A colleague without courage, Jared didn't reply to the email. He just stared at the screen, hand frozen over the mouse. He opened the internal search tool, typed Megan Hall. Nothing. No photos, no records, no badge number. She never existed according to current data. But just as he was about to close the file, a strange message flashed in the corner of the screen: archive lock, manual override denied. It would not allow deletion. That email somehow was marked indelible. Jared didn't understand why. But perhaps someone before him had chosen to preserve a trace not as evidence, but as conscience. So he did the only thing he could think of. He printed out the email. Didn't save it on the computer. Didn't send it over the network. Just a single hard copy folded and slipped behind the 2017 ethics manual, an old dusty book hardly anyone opened anymore. On the book's cover was an old quote: "We do not get to choose how we are remembered, but we do get to hold on to something, so we are not forgotten completely." Monday afternoon, it was raining, a persistent, quiet rain that fell over the old administrative rooftops where water pooled more than it drained. Elena, a new intern assigned to archive documents for the logistics department, was fumbling through dusty files in storage room number 3, a small room with peeling walls and drawers creaking like moans from a past not properly buried. At the end of the corridor stood an unlocked safe moved out of the records room back in 2019 because it no longer served a security function, yet no one had removed it. It remained there like a stubborn trace. No one asked about it, no one explained. Out of curiosity, and partly to break the monotony of her dull work, Elena pulled open the safe drawer. Inside was only one item: a yellowed black and white photo, roughly 4.6 inches, wrapped in an old newspaper. The photo showed a group of 6 men in police uniforms, standing formally, eyes fixed on the camera, and in the middle of them stood a young woman also in uniform, but not looking at the lens. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes seeming to look past someone or something beyond the frame. Her smile was not the kind posed for a photo. There was no performance, just a faint curve at the corner of her lips, an expression neither clearly sad nor fully formed, as if holding back something unsaid. No name, no caption. But what made Elena freeze was not the photo itself. It was the back of it, a faded ink line written slantwise and quickly, as if hurriedly folded and hidden away. "Don't let the eyes of others decide who is left behind" in the picture. The words bore no signature, yet they struck a silent chord, and even though Elena didn't fully understand, she felt something in the photo did not want to be forgotten. She took the photo up to the main office and asked her direct supervisor, Lieutenant Barrow, who had worked there for 17 years. Barrow looked at the photo, thoughtful. After a moment, he spoke. "This shouldn't be here. I thought it had all been recalled. Elena was surprised recalled why Barrow didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window. The rain kept falling steadily, a rain not loud but hard to forget once it had visited. The girl in the photo is Hall, Megan Hall. You may not have heard the name. It's old news. But she used to be part of this team. Elena suddenly remembered a strange email file she had once stumbled upon in the archive system. The name Megan flickered through her mind like an underlined question mark left unanswered. What happened to her? Lieutenant Barrow closed his eyes for a moment, then said, "Sometimes, people don't want to remember someone who doesn't fit the frame they've drawn." Megan didn't break the law, but she broke the unspoken rules. Elena frowned. Unspoken rules. Barrow said no more. He simply gestured. "Leave the photo with me. I'll put it back where it belongs." But Elena held the photo tight as if it was trembling lightly in her hands, not from moisture but from something still unsaid. "May I keep a copy?" she asked. "I think there will come a time when someone needs to look back and understand better what happened." Barrow hesitated, then nodded slowly. That night, Elena went home. She scanned the photo and posted a status on the police training school's internal forum. "Has anyone ever met the woman in this photo, not for any reason at all? I just want to know if a smile once hidden away is still remembered by anyone." No one replied for the first 3 days, but on the 4th night, an anonymous message arrived in Elena's inbox. No text, just an audio file. She opened it. Inside was a woman's voice, low, slow, and clear, reading a passage aloud. "If a photo has no name, no date, no caption, the only thing that keeps it from being forgotten is the one who looks and chooses to believe there is something worth keeping." And the voice paused, leaving a long silence before cutting off completely. Elena didn't know who sent it, but from that moment on she began pinning the photo to the small notice board in the school corridor. No one took it down. No one added notes. Only every morning, one more person stopped for a few seconds looking at the photo and wondered, not out of curiosity, but because of something almost lost. Who is she? His name was Darren, a final-year sociology investigation student. He wasn't part of the police force, had never been trained, and had almost no connection to the place where the name Megan Hall once existed, like a crack hastily plastered over a concrete wall. He only happened to see the photo one Saturday afternoon while visiting his cousin Elena at the dormitory. At first, Darren skimmed past it, thinking it was just a simple keepsake, a typical group uniform photo seen in training courses. But something made him look back. Perhaps it was the girl's eyes in the photo, eyes not focused on the camera, but looking through it as if scrutinizing whoever would see the picture on some undefined day. Darren asked Elena about it. She told him little. She had no data, only a feeling that the photo was not a coincidence. Darren began to investigate, not for a paper, not for grades, but because the silence surrounding the photo disturbed him like reading a book missing an important chapter. And the deeper he dug, the stranger it became. No records of anyone named Megan Hall existed in the police team's administrative system at the time the photo was taken. No commendations, no disciplinary notes, no punishment decisions, nothing at all. As if she had never been officially enrolled. As if the person in the photo was just a passerby placed in the center, then erased from the roster after a closed-door meeting. Darren turned over old archives. He found a faded internal report, just a blurry scanned copy, with many formatting errors sent by someone with the initials JR. In that report was a blacked-out passage, but Darren used UV light and faintly saw 3 handwritten words in the margin: "Slept with 7 colleagues." and underneath, in different handwriting, scribbled voluntary or coerced unknown, but everyone stayed silent. That was the beginning of a tragedy no one dared to name. Darren didn't draw conclusions. He quietly recorded every discovery and began writing not an investigation report, but an imagined narrative from the perspective of the person standing in the middle of the photo. I do not hold my head high to prove my innocence. I just refuse to fall the way they want me to disappear. I am not the main character, just a pause in a story everyone wants to skip. That writing was never published. Darren printed it as a slim booklet and sent it to Elena with a note. You are the first to look at this photo without forgetting. I only follow that gaze. The next week, Elena quietly placed the booklet in an open library drawer where students could read any time. She did not write the author's name, only this on the cover, for anyone who once thought they didn't belong. The first message arrived at 4:47 a.m. No subject, no sender address, just a short paragraph in an anonymous email. If you think Megan was fired for breaching professional ethics, you're on the wrong track. She was removed because she didn't agree to the soft handling approach. We chose silence and kept our positions. She didn't. Darren read it over and over, his heart heavy. He had suspected a cover-up, but for the first time someone confirmed it. The price Megan paid wasn't for what she did, but for what she refused to do. 2 days later, the second email came. It contained only a photo of a blurry scanned handwritten note. MH refused to sign the internal agreement to consent to personal interactions outside working hours with the coordination team. Report retained. Then she was summoned for a unilateral investigation without legal representation. At the bottom of the photo, a red ink circle highlighted the line, "No recommendation to restore honor." Darren sat motionless for hours. The fragmented facts he had pieced together now formed a distorted yet truer picture than any official report. There were records without titles, no document codes, no dates. But they existed, silently, under keyboards, in drawers, on the white wall where someone once sat alone on night duty, fully aware that if they didn't record it, there would be nothing left to remind that it had happened. The third email was a confession, long, nameless. But the shaky tone betrayed deep remorse. She once told me, "I don't need anyone to believe me. I just need a place to sign the story I choose not to keep silent about." When she left, I didn't see her off. I turned away thinking that was neutrality. But silence is never neutrality. Silence is complicity. Since then, once a week, Darren received an unsigned, unidentified email. But they touched his soul deeply, as if the collective memory, fragmented and hidden for years, was finding its way back through those who had witnessed. One final email arrived before dawn, containing only one sentence. If you still have that photo, let it be not just evidence, but a door, for us to step out of victimhood and rewrite our roles in the truth. Darren printed all the emails and taped them to the wall of his room. No categorizing, no digitizing. He didn't want them labeled, because this time the truth wouldn't need a name to exist. It rained on the exact day he returned. No one warned. No one waited. He sat there in the corner of the old break room beside the dusty glass window where Megan used to stand, watching the parking lot late at night. Beneath the thick coat was the face of a man long familiar with the role of the past, so old that no one expected him to come back. Darren was the only one who noticed. Uncle Peterson. He nodded lightly, no smile. His dry, bony hands held a sealed file bag, no label, no ink stamp. Only a smudge like rain had once touched the edge of the paper. "I only have one more night shift left. Then I'm done," he said, his eyes not looking at Darren but through the glass where streetlights reflected in long streaks, like memories flowing backward. Do you still have that old radio, the cassette type from before digitization? Darren nodded. Peterson took out a tape, a black cassette with a faded label but beside it a red pen marked MH, Session X Delta. This is the recording of the last meeting she attended. No one but us and an internal officer were there. But I transcribed it. Because I knew, if it got lost, people would only know her through photos and ethical faults. No one would remember how her voice slightly trembled reading the first sentence. Darren went silent. When the tape played, both sat still, as if listening again to the breath of the past. I don't deny I had relationships, but I deny that it was the only reason I was brought before the disciplinary council. I just ask, if I were a man, would anyone call this a violation? I accept being fired, but don't rewrite the story so that every other girl has to wonder if she stands out too much. Is she putting herself at risk? After her voice came a long silence. Very long. Peterson turned off the tape. I kept this for 14 years. Not because I was afraid, but because I hoped someone young enough, stubborn enough, and hurting enough would open it again, not to archive it, but to let it resound. He placed a hand on Darren's shoulder, his eyes neither pleading nor overly emotional, just a sad look the elderly use when telling of something lost, but never regained. Now it's yours. Don't digitize it. Let it live as an echo in the break room at the end of every shift. Like a voice no one wanted to hear, but that will always exist if anyone is brave enough not to erase it. Then he left. No one saw him off. Only the sound of rain. That night, Darren took the tape home. He didn't save it to a hard drive, didn't upload it online. He just plugged the old radio into the outlet, letting the recording play continuously as a ritual. And at the end of the shift, when the hallway lights dimmed, a young female officer passed by the room. She stopped, frowned. "Who's talking?" Darren didn't answer. He only turned slightly and whispered, "Someone who was never heard." But now, she is the last voice on the night shift. That year's new training class was unexpectedly large. The old schoolyard of the academy had been converted into a semi-open seminar room, but the wooden chairs lined up as they had been years ago were kept intact like a small relic no one wanted to change. Because no one really knew why they kept them, only that changing them felt strange. The intern named Riley was the earliest to arrive that morning. She chose to sit in seat number 7, the chair near the door's edge behind an old lamppost. As she set down her backpack, Riley suddenly felt the wooden surface beneath her hand was slightly rough. Not a scratch from time, but a carved inscription. The letters were small, delicate, almost hidden beneath the faded wood paint. "If one day you have to stay silent to remain, know that you are drifting away from yourself." Riley froze. She shone her phone's light to read each word again. The message had no name, no date, no sign of who left it. But one thing was certain, this was no joke. Because there was something deeply real about how those letters were etched, deep, resolute, yet not violent. As if the writer had hesitated long, but ultimately couldn't resist leaving something behind, even if only with the blunt tip of a key. During that lecture, the instructor, a seasoned former police officer, unexpectedly mentioned a name Riley had never heard before: Megan Hall. He didn't recount any scandal, didn't read old reports. He only asked one question. If today you see your teammate pushed into the shadows for reasons not in the official handbook, will you stand still or will you record it, even if only with a line no one reads? Riley was silent, and when the class ended, she returned to seat number 7. This time she didn't sit. She only took her phone and photographed the inscription as a nameless reminder. That night, Riley sent the photo to the training group chat. No note, no comment. But within an hour, the image was shared nearly 40 times. Someone asked, "Whose is this?" Another replied, "Maybe hers." No one dared say the name, but everyone understood what hers meant here. Because there are people who, even without ever teaching you a single hour, still leave traces, as if they themselves live again in the question you've just started asking yourself. He was the last night shift supervisor still active in the internal patrol team. 34 years had passed since the day he first stepped into the force. His hair had turned so white that colleagues couldn't tell where the dust from old files ended and where time had settled on his shoulders. Every night, he would sit in the attic office, an old loft with a sliding window and a ceiling fan that whirred steadily like a breath struggling to keep the past from crashing down. That evening, during a training session for rookies on ethics management in the force environment, a trainee asked if an event was erased from the records, but passed down through stories, can it still be considered true? The room fell silent. And the old supervisor, for the first time in many years of just listening, stood up. He didn't step onto a podium. He didn't give his name. He only said, "Someone once asked me that question." It was the girl who was removed from the ranks for reasons that later we realized had nothing to do with professional ethics, but with the ethics of the crowd. The room seemed to hold its breath. He pulled a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper from his inner pocket. On it was a faintly printed internal message, Case MH handled under Regulation Section 6.3, unsuitable for collective disciplinary environment. Just one line, no reason stated, no context given. But anyone who worked the late shift that year understood. We didn't punish her because she was wrong. We punished her because we lacked the courage to admit we were wrong. A trainee asked, "What was her name?" He smiled a very slight smile as if lifted from a corner of memory no one had ever cleaned. Her name was Megan. Megan Hall. Another trainee blurted out Megan Hall. But no one mentions that name anymore. Online, she's just a symbol of something people avoid talking about. He shook his head slowly. She was the first to dare not to avoid it. And just because she didn't fight back, people thought she accepted it. But in truth, Megan chose a way to keep the truth from being drowned out by screams. Instead, through quiet presence stronger than any shout. He then took out a photo from his pocket. It was unclear, just a shadowy figure sitting in an administrative hallway next to an old photocopier and a wall plastered with yellow, sticky notes. Scribbled on it was a phrase, "Silence is not a crime, but abandoning someone just because they don't scream, that is." There are stories that don't begin with gunshots nor end with verdicts. They are born from hesitant nods in break rooms, hurried clinks of glasses after shifts, lingering glances longer than necessary in cramped hallways, and they grow from the silence of those who have learned to look away. Megan Hall was neither a perfect victim nor a hero. She was simply a name thrust onto the headlines, as if she alone represented a flawed system everyone had once contributed to, then quickly dismissed when the scandal broke. In a case involving 7 men, only one was branded notorious. That one was her. She did not speak out, did not argue, did not try to defend herself. But that silence, rather than being respected as a private choice, was interpreted as acceptance, as confession, as tacit acknowledgement of everything imposed on her. What was hurt the most wasn't her reputation, but the way people saw her as a symbol of decay instead of a marker of systemic failure. The truth is, cases like these never have just one culprit. They are made up of forced laughs over drinks, subtle insinuations during shifts, and colleagues who could have stood up but chose to step back to remain silent. Because it's not my problem. There is something strange about memory. The more you try to hide something, the easier it leaves a trace. After Megan was dismissed, after sensational headlines and edited interviews, people began to forget her name. But somewhere in a hidden corner, in a new training class, in an ethics lecture, a young person who never knew who she was stumbled upon the final line in an old, undeleted report. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the wrongdoing itself, but the way an entire organization chooses to act as if nothing happened. Megan's story no longer appears in the press, but it begins to live again in those who ask questions. And as the last person who remembers her grows older, the question left behind is no longer, "What did she do?" but "What did we do?" when she needed to be believed. If you've followed this far, perhaps you feel it too. There are silences that need to be filled with understanding, not judgment. And if you've ever been misunderstood, left standing alone under suspicious eyes, then Megan is no longer just a name. She is a wake-up call, a mirror, a reminder that some truths don't need anyone's recognition. They are truest that way. Please share this story if you think it deserves to be heard again, but this time with more kindness. Because sometimes the kindest thing we can do is simply to call by the right name the one who has been forgotten. And don't forget to support us with a like and subscribe. See you in the next video.